Hey everyone, welcome to Sustain Charlotte's Grow Smart CLT Mobility for All event. As you're joining, we want you to consider the question that we have as an icebreaker, and you can type your answer into the chat. So it's actually two questions. First, what comes to mind when you hear the word mobility, and what barriers to mobility do you and or the people in your community face, however you define community? And as you're doing that, I want to let you know that I have two Sustain Charlotte team members working here behind the scenes helping out. We have Eric Zaverl, who is monitoring our question and answer box, and Tariq Kiley is co-hosting, so he'll be helping with any issues that might arise. So as you're typing your answers into the chat box, I want to tell you a little bit about today's event. So the title is Mobility for All. We're really going to be unpacking that word mobility as we consider some of the city planning processes that influence our ability to get around the Queen City. And today's event is sponsored very generously by HDR. HDR is a full service consulting firm specializing in engineering, architecture, environmental construction services, and planning. HDR's skilled local professionals have the vision and passion for developing unique mobility solutions for the Charlotte region, solutions geared to enhance livability and improve the quality of life for area residents and visitors. So we're very grateful to have their support. Also, I haven't introduced myself. I'm Meg Fensel. I'm the Director of Engagement and Impact at Sustain Charlotte. And just in terms of some logistics, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box, and Eric will be monitoring those. He might consolidate some questions that are similar for our speakers. If we don't have time to get to your question before the hour is over, don't worry. I will be sharing all of the questions that are put into the Q&A box with our speakers, and they will know that those are questions that you've raised, and they'll be able to follow up with you if you have asked them in the Q&A box. So tomorrow I'll be sharing a recording of the event and a follow-up email along with links to help you act on some of the public input opportunities that are shared tonight. So don't feel like you need to write down all of the links and all of the web pages that are shared tonight. We'll definitely make sure you have access to those. If you find today's event valuable and you learn something new, I invite you to consider becoming a member of Sustain Charlotte. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, inspiring choices that lead to a healthy, equitable, and vibrant community for generations to come. So there's different ways to get involved. You can become a member at our membership page at sustaincharlotte.org/membership. You can make a one-time donation. If you are part of a company or organization, you can learn more about our partnership program to support us year-round. And we also have employee match giving programs. So as we talk about the word mobility, we want to think first what the standard definition is, and then what it means in terms of people being able to access opportunity in Charlotte. So a simple kind of dictionary definition of mobility from the Cambridge English Dictionary is simply the ability to move freely or be easily moved. If we look at a more kind of differentiation between the word transportation and mobility, I like what Mobility Lab has to say. They say we take the word mobility for granted, but it's not synonymous with transportation. Transportation is basic, moving stuff and people. Mobility is more than that. To have mobility is to have access, getting to places necessary for living a healthy life. Your job, school, doctor's office, community centers, parks is possible. So there's so much going on in the city right now with transportation and land use planning. And a lot of this really is going to impact the mobility of not only those of us who are alive now, but even future generations as Charlotte is so rapidly growing. And I realize there's a lot happening right now. It can be overwhelming to understand a lot of these different processes, let alone to know how to give input. So we really wanted tonight's event to be an opportunity for you to hear directly from the experts in various city departments who are working on these plans and processes. I'd like to introduce our presenters. Alicia Osborne is the Division Manager and Assistant Director at the City of Charlotte's Planning, Design, and Development Department. Johanna Quinn is the Planning and Design Division Manager at Charlotte DOT, and Bruce Jones is Transportation Planner 2 at the Charlotte Area Transit System. So I'm going to turn it over to Alysia to kick off our presentation.
All right, thanks Meg for the introduction. You think by now we have this whole thing figured out with Zoom, but every time seems like the first time. But thank you, Sustain Charlotte, for hosting this event, HDR for sponsoring it, and to our friends at the Sustain Charlotte organization. We're very excited to share about our major strategic planning initiatives and transportation initiatives at the City of Charlotte. So this is a bumper sticker that my boss used to have when I first started at the City of Charlotte in the Charlotte Department of Transportation, way back, I won't say a date, but this is the bumper sticker she had on her door to remind us of the close relationship that land use and transportation has in creating great cities. It's the land use, stupid, not just the traffic. So every day we walk by this bumper sticker, and it helped us to keep that front of mind as we worked on the urban street design guidelines and also small area plans where we really started to look at mobility and land use in lockstep. Fast forward, maybe a little bit less than 20 years later, we were still planning and have still been planning in that same vein, and council adopted the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan, which is our long-range growth strategic guidance for growth and development in our community. It's not just a plan about what we should do with land use, but it talks about complete communities and looks at how we think about growth from a land use, mobility, and using equity lens about connecting more people to goods and services in their community. And what's key in that plan, and much different than the work we've done before, is the equitable growth framework, which is a series of indicators to help us to understand how to improve access, physical access to goods and services and jobs and needs in the community, but also access to opportunity, access to housing, access to social capital. Those types of things are included in the plan. And so the plan was adopted in June of this year, and there are three major initiatives that are happening right now that the community is involved in and engaged in to implement that vision that was set forth in the community, in the comprehensive plan. So from a land use perspective, we have the 2040 policy map. For mobility, we have the streets map, the streets manual, and some other initiative that my partner, Johanna Quinn, will talk more about. And then also the work with CATS that really focuses on that transit portion of creating a more connected community. And then also happening right now, we just released the Unified Development Ordinance, which is the set of regulations as development happens to implement the vision that we have in the policy documents for mobility and connecting our people to great places throughout the community. So what is the 2040 policy map? It takes the place-based policies within the comp plan and translate it into a tool, a new land use classification that we're calling place types. And so it provides guidance for where and how development should occur, and also replaces the city's current policy map. As many of you know, we have over 80 plans that have guidance on how we should develop. The comp plan puts all that thinking, great thinking in those plans into one document, and the policy map will take those policies that are place-based and apply them to different parcels throughout the community. So what do we mean by place-based policies? These are two goals within the comprehensive plan where we can really start to see the vision of the plan into action using place types and how it might occur in the policy map. So for example, in goal number 2, it talks about neighborhood diversity and inclusion. And one of the main parts of that goal is around providing more housing options by allowing more duplexes, triplexes, and quads in throughout our neighborhood. And so how that would show up in a policy map is to take that vision for housing options and to provide it in neighborhood 2, community activity center, or regional activity center. So the map also provides citywide direction for balancing our future needs and opportunities. It protects some of our places in terms of our neighborhoods and employment centers, while also providing opportunity for growth. It aligns where that growth should happen with our infrastructure capacity. A lot of what Johanna and Bruce will talk about is that capacity. But what Charlotte has done a really good job at over the years and has a good history of is trying to make sure that growth follows where the infrastructure capacity is. So we've done, as part of this process, some growth projections and some market studies and infrastructure capacity studies to make sure that for the next 20 years, we're putting growth in the places where infrastructure can support it. So what do we mean by complete communities and what is a place type? Again, it's a new classification system to organize patterns of development. It thinks more holistically, not just about the land use, but how you move and connect to those uses in our community. And then it also modernizes our toolbox in how to use, think about growth and development in the future. So here's the 10, the palette for the place types that was adopted within the comprehensive plan. They can easily be organized into 3 big categories: where we live, which is our parks and preserves near the neighborhoods; where we work, which is commercial, campus, like our universities or our hospitals; and then moving more toward our industrial land uses, which serve as key employment centers throughout the community. And then place types are where we connect in the middle, and that's our regional activity centers like Uptown or Ballantyne or South Park. And then our community activity centers like our transit station areas, and then those smaller neighborhood nodes within our neighborhoods are neighborhood centers. So the mapping process takes place in 3 steps. First, we wanted to map what's on the ground and translate that existing development to place type. So they gave us an idea of what the tool will look like. And this part was for reference only to get the community familiar with the tool and how our current policy translate to a place type map. The second part of that was to translate the current adopted future land use policy to a map. So that's how are we planning to grow now? What does that map say? And if we change to place type, what does it look like? And then the third map, the one that's under review now, with the community, is the future policy map. That includes the comprehensive plan, the equitable growth framework, and other market readiness and other inputs to help us to map the future of growth and development in the city using the place type pool tool. So the engagement for this activity mirrors the phases of the development of the map. So phase 1, we had a survey. Each resident within the city of Charlotte and its surrounding counties received a postcard to participate in that survey. We had about 4,700 responses. Phase 2, which we're wrapping up this week, we've had 37 community conversations. That's where people can come to a meeting and speak directly with staff about their comments on the online application, where we received 700 or so participants. And currently this week we have in-person meeting office hours where you can walk into a library or to the government center and speak with the staff member directly with your comments or questions. Phase 3 begins in January, where we release a revised map based on the feedback that we receive. And then we will begin the review and adoption process before Planning Commission and City Council. So here's the information about our drop-in hours, our office hours: 40 hours this week, where you have a dedicated staff person to answer your question. Here are the locations and the times. So here's the next steps, the path forward. As I mentioned, the second draft of the map comes out in January, and then we'll begin the review and adoption process with council. And here's the QR code. If you visit our website, you can provide input on all 3 initiatives: the policy map, the strategic mobility, the streets map, and the UDO. And I'll turn it over to Johanna to share more information about the mobility part of our initiatives. You're muted, Joanne.
Alicia, what'd you say about Zoom? We think by now we'd have it right, but there's always something. So good icebreaker though. So Alicia, thank you. And Meg, thanks to Sustain for having us here this evening. I'm Johanna Quinn with Charlotte Department of Transportation. I'm the Planning and Design Division Manager. My group has been working closely with the Planning Department through all of these initiatives from the mobility standpoint. So this slide and similar versions of this slide, you're going to see a few times through my presentation because it's really important. There's a lot of moving parts and it's really kind of important to understand where they fit among it. Now, as Alicia pointed out, we've got the Adopted 2040 Comprehensive Plan. That is the umbrella under which we all operate right now. From a mobility standpoint, so Alicia, if you'll move to the next slide. From a mobility standpoint, we are following the guidance of Goal 5 of the 2040 Plan, Safe and Equitable Mobility. So this slide hits on all of the most important key elements of that goal. Next slide, please. And so within that, we have working under that, we have our strategic mobility plan, which I'll touch on towards the end of my piece here. But right now, what we're going to focus on mostly is what's within the contents of the Streets Manual. So the Streets Manual reflects our transportation policy. It also sets the guidelines by which development follows and applies to the UDO. So from a policy standpoint, we walk along with the 2040 policy map, but a lot of what comes out of that Streets Manual is really what development follows. As the city grows, it defines a lot of the mobility requirements of development. So next slide, please. Key in what we are moving forward from a policy and practice standpoint, what we're implementing as part of the Streets Manual is how do we start to really successfully look at a shift in travel patterns and mode. So right now, we're almost 77% single occupancy vehicle. We have a goal to start reducing that, and we are kind of methodically moving towards that with elements of the Streets Manual and how we approach development and how they mitigate for their impacts. And so the intent is to create new capacity basically within our system by encouraging the shift to transit, to walking, to biking. So next slide. So you see this one again because it's important to understand how they all wrap in. So getting ready to talk about the Streets Manual. It includes the streets map that's walking along with the streets with the policy map. So next slide. So what is the streets map? So really it is a citywide map of all the arterials. It defines the multimodal cross section for each arterial. And it also defines what development sets up for and sometimes builds as far as the street network, as far as improvements to the street network go. It also includes future arterials that are currently defined in the city's comprehensive transportation plan, which will be hopefully advanced as we move through the development process. It also defines some very specific design standards for development dependent upon the street type that they are on. So right now we are following the policy map and its commenting process. So if you've gone online to the policy map to comment, you'll also see the streets map overlaid with the ability to comment on any of the arterials as well as the collectors within the system. So I think we've gotten several hundred comments to date. If you haven't been out there to see it, please do. We are not wrapping up our comments on the 19th as the policy map is, because we are connected to the UDO comment as well. And those interested in the review of the UDO and the remainder of the streets manual will want the ability to have access to that the streets map ongoing. So we have not actually come up with an end date yet to be fully transparent. We're trying to balance that need to close it, update it for the next draft, but also allow those who are reviewing the UDO that came out just a little bit later to be able to comment as well. So next slide, please. So when you go to the streets map, you'll see this, which really defines each street classification, each arterial classification within the city. So it's a parkway, a boulevard, an avenue, or a main street. Now, when you click on that, next slide, please, it will give you the multimodal cross section for every arterial. And this is just a graphic description of what you'll see, but ultimately what it gives development is a distance from the center line of the street to the back of curb. And then it also defines what the planting strip and pedestrian facilities are. So this is really important because we need to ensure that development reserves the space needed to accomplish these multimodal cross sections moving forward. And a lot of our arterials, while they may be built out for vehicles, still are not yet built out for bikes and for pedestrians. So next slide. So the next piece of the streets manual is a comprehensive transportation review. And so those of you who follow development, you're probably familiar with what we call our traffic impact study, our TIS. And so right now, that is the mechanism by which we apply mobility mitigations to development and to mitigate for their impacts. Largely, that's around cars. As we move forward, the comprehensive transportation review is a multimodal document. So it has development, it considers development impacts across the board and has mitigations for pedestrians, we also have TDM requirements. So that loops in transit as well as bike ped. And then for the largest developments, there is the car impacts. But we really are working hard to have development recognize, as well as the community recognize the impacts to other modes as well as vehicular, and impact and mitigate for those as well. And so right now, the comprehensive transportation review document is out for comment. Next slide. And so if you go out there, and it really would be helpful to hear from those who are really interested in mobility as a whole. Development really has an eye for this type of requirement. They know how to read it a little bit differently. So for those of you who are really interested in mobility and the integration of land use and transportation, this is a really important document. And it would be nice to have more conversation with groups like you all about this to get your take on it. Because really what we want to do, as this said, is move people. So we've got thresholds for each of the modes. The intent is to reduce trips. So really we've got a pretty strong TDM component. And finally, we want to manage traffic. So as I said, for those larger developments, they would be subject to a look at vehicular mitigations. So next slide. So all of this is available at this fairly long web address, or y'all, this is what I do. If you just search on Charlotte Streets Manual, it'll get you right there. And this has all of the documents. So it'll have the streets map, which links to the policy map that Alysia was telling us about. It also has all the components of the streets manual to include the CTR and the driveway regulations, which we haven't talked about tonight. They have been out there for quite a while, and any any adjustments to those have been put really into the UDO. So next slide. And finally, a quick touch on the strategic mobility plan. So the strategic mobility plan is sometimes a mouthful, but it really is where all of our transportation policies reside. We have really pretty current transportation policies. We've been working on those over the course of the last going on 2 decades, but have been recent updates to the bike and ped policies. And so while there may be some modernization to those here and there, largely what the strategic mobility plan is a process by which we start to really look at how we define projects and priorities throughout the city. So we've really been spending a lot of time and energy on getting our streets map together, getting the transportation review, getting all the components together to move forward with the UDO. Later, and we're pretty late in this year, but later this year, early next year, there's going to be a lot more energy that the city puts into developing and finalizing the strategic mobility plan. So we'd love it if we could come back and speak with you all as we get further into that. For now, we do have an online presence and the ability to comment just kind of what you see in the city from a mobility standpoint. And with that, I think we hand it over to Bruce with CATS. Thank you all.
Good. Thank you, Johanna. Thanks, Alicia, as well. And then also thank you, Meg, for asking us to join you tonight. So just to echo some of my colleagues' comments, I do want to stress the importance. Well, first, let me start by saying Bruce Jones here with Charlotte Area Transit. So I am a transit planner within our service planning division. But want to just echo some of the previous comments made by my colleagues. And so what we're working towards is shaping the overall future vision for growth throughout the Charlotte region. And so some of the transit initiatives that we're working on at CATS ties in greatly with some of the initiatives that our partners are working with. So specifically, as we look through some of the policies and goals that were established through the Charlotte 2040 plan, and then also echoing on Joanna's comment about how we transition individuals with that mode shift, we're now looking at what we can do from a transit perspective to help support some of the long-term goals. So you can go to the next slide. And so I'll just walk through some of the ongoing initiatives that we're working on at CATS. So I'll start with our link system updates. And so that includes the ongoing initiative that we've been working on. This is Link Silverline, which I'm sure a number of you have been familiar with. So that's actually a project that we are currently conducting outreach to get input on some of the initial recommendations that we've recently developed. So I'll go through that too and learn and explain how you can be involved with that process. In addition to that, I'll touch on our North Corridor rapid transit plans for how we can improve service to and from Uptown Charlotte and some of our North Met communities. In addition to that, I'll touch on our recently extended CityLink's Gold Line streetcar service, and to go into some detail as far as the extension as well. And then I do have that as an error. I'll just briefly mention, we do have plans for the Lynx Blue Line extension to Pineville Ballantyne. I don't believe I actually have a slide on that, but I can talk briefly about that as well. And then in addition to that, last but certainly not least, some of the network improvements that we're making through our Envision My Ride network to help build a better bus network and improve service for individuals. You can go to the next slide. And so to start with the Link Silverline, so this project has 3 components to it. So some of the initial work that we're doing now is the design and environmental services part of the project. So that's looking at the route alignment, determining the impact that it will have on the environment, determining station locations, and so on. In addition to that, we're also applying lessons learned from the Lynx Blue Line to look at how we can support transit-oriented development along this Link Silver Line. So looking at how we can be more inclusive and making sure that we're establishing equitable goals in terms of meeting affordable housing, and making sure that we're establishing policy so that we have that in place so that we can help support that framework. And then in addition to that, looking at how we can continue to build a pedestrian path along the Link Silver Line known as a rail trail. So if a number of you are familiar with the Lynx Blue Line on the south end, you're familiar with the rail trail that runs adjacent to that. And so with the Lynx Silver Line, we're looking at how we can build a continuous rail trail that will run for most of the alignment. You can go to the next slide. And so this is a snapshot of the Lynx Silver Line itself. And so this is actually the longest light rail project that CATS has undertook. So we're looking at 29 miles roughly in terms of total length. And with that, 29 stations. And so this will cover 3 counties and then 5 jurisdictions. So it'll extend from Belmont, going over past the airport, through uptown Charlotte, and then down to the town of Matthews as well, and then eventually into Stallings and Indian Trail. And you go to the next slide. And so we are currently holding focused neighborhood meetings. So we actually have an online open house that's actually available if you go to our website, ridetransit.org/linksilverline. And so with some of the initial recommendations that we're presenting, we made some refinements to the alignment and then also added additional stations based on input received from the public. And so now we're presenting that information. So if you go to the website that I just mentioned, you can partake in our online open house. You can walk through that for more detail and then also provide comment as well. And so that will actually be available through November 28th. So we do encourage you to log onto our website and do take advantage of that. We're also in the process of, We're also in the process of presenting this to our governing board for adoption. So we're actually giving them an information item tonight. And then based on some of the input that we receive, based on the public input through November 28th, we'll come back to our governing board for approval in early 2022. And then we'll begin some of the preliminary work for environmental design to look at the overall impact as it stands. You can go to the next slide. In addition to that, we're also working on a strategy for the North Corridor BRT Rapid Transit Program. So building upon some of the service that we initially implemented back in February of last year. So we implemented Metro Rapid, which is a service that takes advantage of the I-77 toll lanes. So it provides quick commutes to and from the North Neck towns and uptown Charlotte. So building upon that, we're now looking at a bus rapid transit plan known as the North Corridor BRT study. And so with that, that'll further define some operational strategies. It'll look at additional park and ride locations in the North Neck community. It'll identify direct connect locations, which are essentially what you see at Hambright and Lakeview, where you can access those exits directly from the toll lanes. And then also looking at how we can continue to support mobility hubs in the bus network in the northern towns. So looking at how we can provide first mile, last mile solutions to connect individuals to and from the rapid transit lines, and then some of those mobility hubs as well in park and ride locations. And then also helping us determine an implementation strategy. And so building upon that too, we are continuing the work for the commuter rail known as the Red Line, in addition to the North Corridor BRT transit study. And so I do want to encourage you, we actually have a public meeting tomorrow, the 18th. I believe it starts at 5:30, but you can go to our website at ridetransit.org and you can get more information on that. And so if you are interested in this project, we do encourage you to partake in that to identify or help us identify solutions for the North Corridor strategy. You can go to the next one. We also recently opened up our revamped streetcar line known as the CityLinks Gold Line. So we initially had a phase, which you see in that top image, phase 1 of the streetcar, which ran from the Charlotte Transportation Center in Uptown Charlotte between Novant Health, which is just on Elizabeth and Hawthorne. We did use the vintage trolley. So a number of you may have been familiar with that. You may have rode that in the past as well. We did recently reopen CityLinks Gold Line. So we extended it a little bit further to connect to the Sunnyside area, just shy of Plaza Midwood. And then also further up to Johnson C. Smith along Beatties Ford Road. And so with that, we did upgrade the vehicle type to a more modern vehicle, similar to what we have on our Lynx Blue Line. And that's what you see in the image below. We do encourage you, if you haven't had a chance, to please take advantage of this service, do ride it. It is currently free of charge through the end of the year. So definitely take advantage of that if you're ever in Uptown. You can go to the next one. And so building upon some of the plans with the CityLink Gold Line, we're now looking at phase 3, which is extending it a little further to connect to our transit centers. So the Rosa Parks Transit Center along Beatty's Ford, which is at the county services just past I-85. And then further down Central Avenue to the Eastland Transit Center, which is at the former Eastland Mall site. And so with this, we'll add 17 additional stations with that and extend a little bit further too. And so we will begin initial work on this soon. So we do encourage you to stay in tune for that information as it becomes available. You go to the next one. And then I wanted to also mention some of the work that we're doing on the bus side of things. So I mentioned some of the rail capital programs that we're looking at, and also the bus rapid transit plan and red line commuter plan, but then also looking at how we can support the bus network by building a better bus network for passengers. And so with Envision My Ride and the bus priority study, we'll be looking at establishing planning goals so that we can help improve route connectivity for individuals, and then also improve frequency and other connections as well. And so we began some of the initial work back in 2018, where we implemented some improvements to our network back in March, which coincided with the opening of the Blue Line extension in Northeast Charlotte. And then also that October, we initially implemented additional improvements throughout the network. And so as we continue to identify funding, the goal is to increase frequency on a number of routes so that they operate every 15 minutes or better. And then at minimum, no route would operate at 30 minutes or a headway greater than 30 minutes, I should say. So every bus would come within a 30-minute time span. In addition to that, with the planning work with Envision My Ride, we're looking to create more crosstown service. So shifting away from that hub and spoke model that fed a lot of our routes into Uptown Charlotte to connect to the transit center. And looking at how we can create more connections outside of Uptown to provide quicker commutes for individuals that don't need to come to Uptown for their service. And so now as we go into the bus priority study, we're building upon some of the initial planning work that we've identified with Envision My Ride, and we're looking at how we can begin to roll out capital improvements. And the main goals with the bus priority study is looking at how we can make service more reliable and quicker for individuals. So looking at how we can take advantage of what we're calling priority bus treatments. So things like the ability to communicate with traffic signals and dedicated lanes where it makes sense as well. And then also looking at how we can continue to improve connectivity to mobility hubs and different modes of mobility as well, such as bike share locations, park and rides, and other facilities too. And then also looking at how we can begin to roll out capital improvements to help improve the passenger experience at the bus stop. And you can go to the next one. And so with the bus priority study and Envision My Ride, we're looking at how we can roll out improvements through our priority network. And that's what you see on the map here. So we have 22 routes that we've identified as future high frequency routes. And so those routes would have 15-minute or better service 7 days a week as we continue to roll out improvements throughout the network. And so with that, we'll also be rolling out, as I mentioned, bus stop improvements. So looking at how we can implement enhanced amenities, such as shelters, off-board fare payment where it makes sense, or the ability to pay your fare before you board the bus. And then also looking at how we can integrate additional things at the bus stop level to help improve that first mile, last mile connectivity. So looking at how we can implement bike share programs, scooter programs, in addition to other forms of mobility. And then also the benefit that we have is that we're able to take advantage of signal priority throughout the entire network. So all of the roadways that CDOT currently maintains will be able to communicate with the traffic signal on our buses. So if we're running behind schedule and we're facing delay, the bus will either advance or extend the green light so that we can get to the intersection and then continue to our destination so we can get individuals to their connections, our destinations in a timely manner. In addition to that, we're also looking at focus treatments on select corridors. And so due to the scope of the project, we're only able to look at 6 corridors in total. But the goal is to establish a capital program that we can begin to roll out throughout the system as a whole. And so what we'll be looking at for those focus treatments are how can we take advantage of things like queue jumps, which is an extension of signal priority. Typically, the bus will have a dedicated space at the intersection. All other traffic will have a red light. The bus will get a special signal that will allow it to jump ahead and continue through the intersection. We'll be looking at other spot level treatments, such as level boarding where possible, off-board fare payment to help speed up the boarding process, and then dedicated transit lanes where it makes sense as well. In addition to that, we'll be looking at how we can continue to improve that hub-to-hub connectivity through crosstown routes, and then also on-demand solutions so that we can help improve first mile, last mile connectivity. You can go to the next slide. And so we did recently conduct our last round of engagement for Envision My Ride. If you do go to our CATS website or our CATS YouTube page, you can actually watch some of the virtual meetings that we've held in the past. We do have recordings of those available. In addition to that, you can also log on to our website, ridetransit.org/envisionmyride. And there you'll find our online open house, where we'll provide you with an overview of the study, and then we'll walk through how we got down to the initial corridors that we'll be looking at for the focus treatments. And then we'll also have scenarios that you can take a look at and then provide input on as well. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Megan. I don't know if we're doing a Q&A portion, but we'll be happy to.
We will be doing a Q&A right after our resident panel. So I want to thank Bruce, Alysia, and Johanna for sharing their expertise with us tonight. And hopefully now you understand more ways to get involved and learn about these various processes that affect our mobility. There's obviously a lot of moving parts, both literally and figuratively, but it's really exciting that so much planning is going into figuring out how Charlotte is going to invest not only in transportation choices, but also in the development of our streets and neighborhoods in a way that will make it easier and safer for people to get around without a car. So what I would like to do now is introduce our panel of residents who have all been very inspirational to me and to Sustain Charlotte as they work to make our community easier to get around without a car. So I first would like to introduce Reverend Janet Garner Mullins, and she'll speak for a minute or two about her perspective on mobility.
Thank you all so very much, Tarika and Meg, for giving me this opportunity to share with the team from a different perspective. We've heard a lot of specs, we've heard a lot of statistical data from the representatives with the city and with the different types of initiatives that are going on from Envision My Ride. What I would like to do is share with the team some thoughts on mobility and transportation for seniors. And so if you will indulge me for a few moments, I want to share some information with you. Transportation is key to how we live our lives. It's always about allowing us to go from point A to point B, to go to work each day, to run errands, to get our essentials, and of course, visit our loved ones. But as we get older, our ability to operate motor vehicles and sometimes diminishes. Such functions such as vision, reaction time, and memory become lost as we age. And sometimes that causes us to have seniors to have our license taken away or our driving privileges taken away. And that can be very difficult, because when you just take away the keys, you're just not taking away the keys. You're taking away an important part of a senior's life, and it can benefit their lives. And so the question then becomes is, why is mobility so important to older adults? Well, I'm glad you asked. Mobility is fundamental to active aging adults in 3 areas, and I want to share quickly and be cognizant of my time. The first area is physical activity. By using the public transportation or specialized transportation services, we as seniors have additional opportunities to keep ourselves active in our daily lives. We can go from taking a bus and we've been dropped off on one point and then come back to another point and get back on the bus. And that promotes our physical activity that we would not have had when we were driving, because we're just sitting still. And so physical activity is an important part as we look at public transportation. And especially for those of us who've been accustomed to driving, and then all of a sudden we're no longer driving, but the bus service gives us an opportunity to be a little bit healthier, and it helps to lower our risk for certain diseases as we age. Another area of importance, in addition to physical activity, is also independence. Once an elderly loved one has to hand over the keys, they often become discouraged. And they are thought of at the time that I've got to rely on family members, I've got to rely on friends and neighbors to take me from point A to point B to do basic daily tasks. But utilizing public transportation is a key to helping us maintain our independence. Not only do we don't have to wait on anybody, we can jump on the bus or get on this services that's available, elder transportation, and go from where we want to go and not wait on anyone and not feel like that we're putting someone out, or we feel that we are needing to inconvenience someone. And knowing that we simply still have the capabilities of caring for ourselves. And in the third and final area that I'm going to talk to you about, remember, one was physical activity, another one was independence, and the final one is quality of life. Overall transportation helps seniors and our senior loved ones maintain a quality of life because we can still get around as we please, and we have a good way of getting around through the bus services and through other means. And we're not sacrificing our remaining years waiting for somebody to do something for us because we cannot drive. This ensures that we're still viable people, we're still valued individuals, and we're still worthy of needing to have what we've had to do taken care of by the means of public transportation. And so this ensures that we're still living a life of quality and that we don't feel limited by our diminished driving capacity. And I'll conclude with this. Just because a senior can no longer drive does not mean life as we know it needs to stop. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Reverend Garner Mullins, for that reminder that we need to invest in a community that works for people of all ages and ability levels. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dustin Branham. Dustin has really inspired me by all of the ways that he's figured out how to get around Charlotte without a car.
Thanks, Meg. So my name's Dustin Branham. I'm an attorney in Charlotte. I live in South End. And to keep it kind of short, I sold my car 3 years ago. I've never looked back, and I'm actually in a car light household. My girlfriend Jenna, who is also an active member of Sustain Charlotte, she has a car. I drive maybe once or twice a month just for out-of-town trips. If I go visit my parents, I go kayaking in the mountains. I have to have a way to get there, but I never drive in the city ever, and I truly don't have any reason to. I realized years ago that there are 3 things someone needs to put into place to be car free. And I want you to know you can do it in Charlotte. It's not that hard. Actually, it's rather easy and it's nice. So the big 3 things that you'll need to put into place are you need to live near places where you hang out and do things for fun. That would be number 1. Number 2 would be to live near where you work or to be able to get there without a car. And the 3rd would be a grocery store. So if you can get to those 3 things, places for fun, for work, and to get groceries, then you're set. We get around the city by sort of in a priority order. We walk places if it's under 3/4 of a mile. We bike places over 3/4 of a mile. And from South End, that's easy. Everything that we do for the most part is bikeable. We'll ride the train. We rode the train to Noda today. We'll do that sometimes. We'll take the bus. And then if we go to the airport, I've used transit. I would like for it to be better and easier for us to go from home to the airport. It's going to get there, but we'll take an Uber or a Lyft to go to the airport. There's no need for a car in there anywhere. And finally, sometimes I'm asked how can I do it? Or really the way the question is usually phrased is, I can't do that because, or that's great for you, but not for me. And here are the reasons. And I want you to know that that's not true. You can do it. You just have to plan your life out a little bit and make decisions accordingly. So first of all, choose your neighborhood. In the short term, this is kind of difficult, but over time, people can move. I did it. You can do it. You have to change the way that you think about transporting yourself. always consider the car as a last ditch option. Our car keys are basically never in my hand, never in my pocket. It's not an option I consider when I go anywhere. Change your menu of destinations. At least that's how I think of it. When you're going out to eat, if you're going to a brewery, if you're going to a movie, only consider places that don't require a car. That's easy if you live in a good neighborhood. It's easy. And then finally, get a bike. Every now and then somebody says, but I don't have a bike. And I say, what do you mean you don't have a bike? This is craziness. Just get a bike. It's the best thing in the world. The radius for biking to destinations is much larger than the radius for walking to destinations. If you can think about how far you're willing to walk, and let's say that's 10 minutes, just imagine how far you can get from home if you ride a bike. It's probably several times as far. And you turn that into a radius, and if you've chosen wisely on where to live, then it just might get you everywhere. And finally, when you ride a bike, dress for the destination, don't dress for the ride. And I think that you'll find it's a very nice, pleasant, fun experience.
Thank you so much, Dustin, for inspiring us to do what we can and sharing some practical ideas for getting around without a car. And I hope that what we learned today is that Charlotte does need more of those neighborhoods that can be reached without a car and that people can afford to live in. There are still, we know, many neighborhoods in Charlotte where the streets are, because of past decades of design, are really only accessible by car. But thanks to the work of so many city staff and advocates, we are working hard to make sure that everyone has the choice to be able to live in a neighborhood where a car is an option rather than a necessity. So now I'd like to introduce Yvonne Hernandez, who is very passionate about transportation and equity.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on tonight. So for me, mobility signifies access to a better life. I actually live very close to work, so I'm able to walk, bike, ride the scooter, and there are just amazing options to commute that I didn't have in the past. I actually used to live on Sunset Road, very close to Oakdale. If you're familiar with the area, you know that there are no sidewalks down that way. It's a 35-mile-per-hour street, but people are normally going about 50, 55, easily 60 or more. And there are no sidewalks, there is no access to public transportation, there is no bike lane. So it's actually a pretty dangerous road to walk. Yet when I would go to work at 7 a.m., because I do have the means to be able to buy a vehicle to go to work and drive. When I would drive, it was 7 in the morning, 38 degrees, and you see a family trying to make it to the bus stop on the corner of Betty Ford's and Sunset Road. And I know that is not unique to that single family. There were many people that had to do this. Luckily, the food line is down the road, so you can get to it. But again, it is very unsafe with no sidewalks. In the past, I've also lived in other areas where it would take me about 2 hours if I wanted to use public transportation. And I did want to mention specifically about the Sunset Road. If you're familiar with the demographics, you know that area is primarily people of color and lower income. And so we see these disparities across the county. And I know these are legacies from, redlining and other issues. And, but those do exist today. So they're not just legacy, there are things that are happening right now. I want to bring to your attention the North Cross Express bus that rides from Huntersville into Uptown. The fare for that bus is $3. Now, if you're familiar with the Huntersville demographics, then you know that it's primarily white and of higher income. When you ride the bus locally, if you're even going just 2 miles down the road, you're going to pay $2.20. So really, people locally are subsidizing the rate for this bus. At least it feels that way. And there are no opportunities for these people that are lower socioeconomic status and people of color to have opportunities to have maybe like a discount fare or anything like that. There's no programs like that right now. So I just want to advocate for that so that we can all have access to a better life, so that everyone can live close to work and do the things that I get to do now. And, you know, I just wanted to bring that to attention, and thank you so much for having me tonight.
Okay, thank you so much, Yvonne, and all of our speakers and presenters. So we will now take some questions that Eric will share.
Yes, and because we covered a lot of material tonight, there's a lot of questions, really good questions. And I know we probably won't get to all of them, but I'm going to try to go by the topic. So that way, maybe a speaker could answer that topic and then we can move on to the next. The first one is living, and it's related to what we just talked about, living near where you work, shop, live may not be possible given the rising costs of living and housing. How might housing affordability factor into land use conversation? And if there's anything that folks could give feedback on the policy map, maybe you could tie that into that question. And I think that's for Alysia.
Okay, thanks for that question. That's a really good one. And so what the policy map and the comprehensive plan, one of the primary goals within that is to provide more, two things. Goal number 2 and 3 actually speak to housing diversity, adding more options for housing. As you all know, there's a shortage of housing in Charlotte and throughout the country. So how do we introduce more housing stock, which doesn't directly impact affordability, but it does help us with our demand for housing. And what the policy map does to address that is to place that new housing closer to goods and services and mobility options. So it's not just providing housing anywhere, but being more strategic about, if we're going to provide more housing options, how do we make sure that it's in those locations where people need to go, or closer to goods and services and jobs that they would like to be a part of. So what I would encourage you to do is go to the policy map. You can get to our website, charlottefuture2040.com, and go to the policy map link and provide comments in areas where you live, where you work, or areas where you play. It doesn't have to be specific to just you, or maybe something about your neighbors, but we want to hear your feedback on, are these places that we're trying to create coinciding with our mobility and options for connecting those types of uses.
Thank you, Alysia. And I want to follow up. I know you answered a question during the last session, and I'm just going to briefly repeat it so folks who may not have noticed it are aware of it. One was just using the policy map you mentioned. Sometimes difficult knowing what place types you're looking at, and there actually is a feature. If you click on any of the given parcels or blocks, you can then click on the place type. I will also put it in the chat right now, so it'll give you the list, the whole listing of a short description of what each place type is like. So this will be a useful tool. So click on it, download it, and then you could use that while you're giving feedback to the policy map. And
Yes, thanks you.
Yep. One other quick question. You mentioned, Alysia, when you're presenting that there's going to be another phase of public input. What would that look like? Will it be similar to what's up currently? And how long would that chance to give feedback be available?
So we're currently developing that process for engagement. Once we release the second draft, it will most likely be similar to the comprehensive plan process, where we presented the draft to council, and then that would begin a conversation and dialogue between council and community, and then a round of revisions or discussions about changes. So that's in January. And then we hope to have more engagement around that second map. So stay tuned for the specifics. We're still in the process in our phase 2 engagement. And so what we really like to do is learn each phase, what works, what doesn't work. So we're not repeating things that aren't working for the community in our next phase of engagement. So we wrap up tomorrow, we'll have some numbers and have real honest dialogue. If the virtual meetings are work, do we need more in-person meetings? Or how might we meet people where they are to share and get feedback on the map?
Thank you. And we have time for just one more question. I'm going to move to the streets map, and maybe Johanna, if you could answer this one. I'm trying to wrap a couple questions up into one, so you can maybe take care of it by kind of weaving it together. But it relates to Vision Zero, cyclists, pedestrians, and it's how will the streets map be used to achieve the goals of Vision Zero, and especially for cyclists and pedestrians, and how sidewalks will become wider, or how bike paths will actually get built because of the streets map. Maybe if you could tie all that in for folks. Thank you.
Okay, so that's a lot, but let me see what I can do. Okay, so keep in mind the streets map is the vision for the arterial network within the city. So the multimodal vision. Really, if we want to bring it all together, we have to consider what development brings and what capital programming brings. And so from a Vision Zero standpoint, we need the separate facilities for the most vulnerable users. And so the streets map lays that vision out. It, in combination with the UDO, start to bring it to fruition incrementally through development. So it may be that development builds it incrementally, or at the very least, development offers up the space that allows for it to be built through public dollars. Then we have the strategic mobility plan that is underway and will be gaining momentum. So I'll put a plug in if we can come back later and talk more about that. But that really helps us start to define and prioritize projects. So stitch together, complete what's been done incrementally through development, and stitch together and I couldn't help but think about when Reverend was speaking about seniors and mobility. As we prioritize, for example, pedestrian projects, then transit availability and need. So low car ownership areas tend to rank very high. That's a consideration. So those are the types of things that we would consider as we prioritize. So the streets map itself doesn't solve for it, but it does set the vision, and it does set what development will bring to the table incrementally. And then that, paired with public dollars, helps to create our network. The public dollars will be prioritized, whereas development just happens as market driven. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you so much, Johanna. And thank you to all of our presenters and our panelists, and also HDR for sponsoring tonight's event. I hope you left with are leaving with a clearer understanding of these transportation and land use planning processes and how you can make a difference. And we will be sending you that follow-up email that will have links to these various meetings and public engagement opportunities. So keep an eye on your inbox, and there will also be a survey in there that you can answer to help us improve our future events. So I hope everyone has a great night, and we hope to see you back at one of our events soon. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Have a happy Thanksgiving.